You win the lottery. Your parents ask for half. What do you say?
I didn't think much of the scratch-off. It was one of those why-not purchases on the way home from work, tossed into my pocket with the receipts and gum. I scraped it at my kitchen counter, half watching a rerun, expecting the usual disappointment. Then my hands went numb. The numbers matched. The bonus box matched. I checked the back. I checked again. I took a photo, then deleted it, then took another, because suddenly my phone felt like a liability. By midnight, I had read enough horror stories to learn one rule fast. Don't tell anybody, and if you do, never tell them how much. Even a lot is too much. A lot grows legs and walks into other people's mouths. My parents called the next morning for the usual Sunday chat. Mom asked if I'd been eating properly. Dad told me about the neighbor's new fence. It sounded so normal that I almost blurted it out like good news, the way you'd share a promotion. But then my dad joked about money, how everything costs more, and my throat went tight. I decided I wasn't going to hand them a pile of cash that could attract every scammer in a 10-mile radius. I also wasn't going to let them worry another day about bills. So I did it quietly. I paid off their mortgage through an attorney and had a new deed prepared for a smaller, safer house closer to my place. One they'd like, not one that screamed, "sudden wealth." I arranged a monthly deposit that looked like a boring retirement supplement, not a jackpot. When I finally told them I'd had a really good year, Mom cried, and Dad got suspicious in that gentle, protective way fathers do. He kept asking, "How much did you win?" I kept smiling and saying, "Enough." The funny thing is, they didn't ask for half. They didn't demand anything. They just asked if I was okay. And when I realized that, I felt something in my chest unclench for the first time since the ticket changed my life. Next story. The first thing my uncle did after I told him was laugh and say, "Well, looks like we're finally doing it." I didn't even have to ask what it meant. In our family, it was the rule everyone talked about like a myth. If anyone ever hit a life-changing jackpot, we'd gather every single debt in the family and wipe it out one time. House balances, car loans, credit cards, student loans, gone. After that, no more handouts except real emergencies. I used to think it was a sweet idea. A clean reset, a way to change everyone's lives without turning into walking ATMs. But that's when the rule was hypothetical, the kind of thing people say at weddings and funerals, before the numbers become real. When I won, I didn't announce it on social media. I didn't throw a party. I told my parents first, then I told one aunt who had co-signed my first car loan when nobody else would. Somehow, within 24 hours, I was getting texts from cousins I hadn't heard from in years. "So proud of you. We should catch up. Can I call?" I rented a conference room in a boring office building and told everyone to bring statements, not stories. The moment I said papers, you could feel the mood shift. Half of them looked relieved. The other half looked offended, like I'd asked them to prove they were hungry before I fed them. My mom's credit card was the worst one. She'd been paying interest like it was a second job. My dad had a small home equity loan he never admitted. One cousin had student debt that made him stare at the floor when he said the total out loud. We made a spreadsheet. We did the math. I paid it all. Every last cent of legitimate debt that existed on that day. Then came the second wave, the part the rule was built to stop. A cousin tried to slide in a new business loan he'd taken out after the family meeting. Another relative asked for just a little extra to redo their kitchen because, and I quote, "it's basically an emergency when your cabinets are ugly." Someone else started hinting about a boat. That night, my phone buzzed nonstop. I didn't answer. I wrote one message, copied it, and sent it to everyone. The reset is done. If you incur new debt after this, that's your responsibility. Some people were angry. Some were embarrassed. My parents hugged me so tight my ribs hurt. And the next morning was the first time in years our family group chat was quiet. because the
Next
rule
story.
finally stopped being a joke.
My stepdad and I
still
became
talked
a
regularly,
boundary.
which is why his call didn't feel suspicious at first. He wasn't the kind of guy who called just to chat, but he wasn't cruel either. He was practical, blunt, the type who believed you should solve problems yourself. Most of my childhood was him teaching me that lesson in ways that didn't always feel like teaching. When the news broke that I'd won, because someone in the family couldn't keep their mouth shut, he didn't even bother with congratulations. "So," he said like we were discussing a grocery list, "your mom tells me you're rich now. We need to talk about what you're giving us." That word, need, hit me wrong. I asked him what he meant. He went straight to numbers. Half. Like it was a standard fee, like raising me came with an invoice. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly him to treat the biggest thing that ever happened to me like a negotiation. I could have hung up. Instead, I heard my own voice get calm in a way that surprised even me. "Do you remember when I had that crisis a few years ago?" I asked. He didn't answer, so I kept going. I was broke, like choosing between groceries and gas broke. I called you because I didn't know what else to do. I asked if you could help me cover a couple weeks of food until I got paid. There was a pause. I could picture him frowning, like he was deciding which version of the past sounded best. "You told me you had no liquidity," I said. "No spare cash. You said you couldn't help." He tried to interrupt, but I didn't let him. "And a few days later, you paid cash for a $70,000 truck." The silence on the other end was so loud it felt like pressure in my ears. I didn't say it as an accusation. I said it as a memory. A fact. The kind that doesn't change just because someone wishes it would. Back then, he'd shrugged and told me, "It's my money, my decision." That sentence became a brick in the wall I had to build around my life. "So here's the thing," I continued. "You were right. It was your money, your decision. And now, it's mine." He finally spoke, voice sharper. "Are you seriously bringing that up?" "Yeah," I said, "because that was the moment I learned what family means to you when money is involved." I offered to make sure my mom was safe and comfortable. I offered medical care, a paid-off home, and peace. But I told him he wasn't getting control, and he wasn't getting half. When we hung up, my hands were shaking, but I felt lighter. Winning didn't change who people were. It just gave them a reason to show it. Next story. My father didn't show up until money did. We had reconnected as adults in that awkward, cautious way people do when they share blood but not memories. He would send a birthday text, sometimes a link to an article he thought I'd like, and then disappear again for months. It was like he wanted the comfort of being in my life without the work of actually living it. So when I won, I wasn't shocked that he suddenly found time. He called like we were close. He talked fast, said he was proud, said he always knew I'd do something big. Then he dropped it. "You should just give me my half and I'll make sure it's invested right." My first thought wasn't anger. It was clarity. Because this wasn't about helping him. It was about handing over control to someone who had never earned it. I told him I was getting professional advice. Lawyers, accountants, a financial planner. The kind of people who don't care about guilt or nostalgia. Only about math and protecting assets. He scoffed. "You don't need strangers taking your money." But I did need someone neutral. Someone who wouldn't call me ungrateful for asking basic questions. The plan we built was simple and unromantic, which is exactly why it worked. I put a large portion into a trust, locked behind rules no emotional phone call could break. It would pay out a monthly amount, enough to cover rent, food, utilities, and a little comfort, without giving him the ability to drain it in one wild moment. I stayed the trustee. I kept the keys. When I explained it, he got offended. "So you don't trust me?" I looked at my own hands and remembered all the times I'd needed him and gotten excuses instead of support. I remembered the way he'd promised to visit and never did. I remembered learning early that disappointment hurts less when you stop expecting anything. "It's not about trust," I said. "It's about responsibility." He argued that he deserved it, that family helps family, that half was fair. But fairness isn't splitting a pie with someone who never helped bake it. In the end, I offered him security, not a blank check. A steady monthly payout he couldn't gamble away, and medical coverage if something serious happened. I offered a life with fewer worries, but not a life powered by my vulnerability. He didn't thank me. He didn't say goodbye politely. He hung up like I'd insulted him. And I realized something. The trust wasn't just protecting the money. It was protecting me from the version of him that only existed when there was something to take. Next story. If you knew my mom, you'd understand why I didn't hand her a suitcase full of cash. She's not a bad person. She's the kind of woman who will feed you before she feeds herself, who will cry during commercials about lost dogs, who will keep a drawer full of spare batteries just in case. But she also has a weakness that has ruined entire months of our lives. She gambles when she's stressed. Not glamorous casinos and champagne, scratch-offs at the gas station, online games, little harmless bets that add up until the rent is late and the power company is calling. So when I won, I didn't tell her immediately. I sat with the ticket in my wallet for 2 days, feeling like I was hiding oxygen from someone who couldn't stop lighting matches. When I finally did tell her, she screamed like I'd brought her back from the dead. Then, almost instantly, her voice shifted into planning mode. "We're going to Vegas," she said, laughing. "We're going to do it right this time." That was the moment I knew the money couldn't go into her hands, no matter how much I loved her. I told her I was setting up something safe, a fund, locked, boring. She pouted like a kid being told they can't eat cake for dinner. I explained it gently. She would get a fixed amount each year, enough to live comfortably, enough to stop working so hard, enough to finally breathe. But there would be no access to the principal. No just this once withdrawals, no midnight app downloads, and I swear it was a sure thing. She accused me of treating her like a child. I told her I was treating the money like it mattered. Then there was my father. He wasn't the same kind of problem. He was the kind of absence that becomes normal. We knew each other now, technically, but there were decades where he was just a name that didn't show up. When he heard about the win through a relative, he called like we were old friends. He asked for half. Like half was a polite request. Like half was owed. I didn't yell. I didn't lecture. I just said no. Unless it was for medical expenses, something real and urgent. Because while he wanted a windfall, I had my own needs I'd ignored for years. I had dental work I kept postponing because it was expensive. I had medical bills in the family that were already waiting. I had a life I was still building. In the end, my mom got safety instead of temptation. My father got a boundary instead of a payday. And I got something I'd never had growing up: control over what happens next. Next story. The call came at 2:17 a.m. I had been sitting on my couch in the dark, staring at the envelope from the lottery office like it might explode if I looked away too long. My mind kept flipping between two thoughts. I can finally breathe, and this is going to ruin my life. I didn't know which one scared me more. My phone buzzed. Unknown number, I answered without thinking. Hello? A voice I hadn't heard in years said my name the way only a parent can, half warning, half love, and my stomach dropped straight through the floor. "Sweetheart," the voice said, "we need to talk about that money." My entire body went cold, because the voice sounded exactly like my mother. The problem is, my mother died 5 years ago. I sat up so fast I got dizzy. My heart hammered hard enough to make my ribs ache. "Who is this?" I whispered. There was a pause, like the person on the line was deciding whether to keep the act going. Then my father's voice, also dead, also impossible, joined in, calm and disappointed. "Don't play games," he said. "Half is fair." That's when my fear turned into pure, ridiculous confusion. I looked around my living room like I expected them to be sitting there in the recliner, smiling like it was Thanksgiving. Either I'm hallucinating, I said out loud, or someone is committing the weirdest scam of all time. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I asked questions only my parents would know. Favorite movie, the nickname my dad had for me as a kid, the brand of root beer my mom swore tasted better in glass bottles. The answers were close enough to be creepy, but not perfect. Like a person doing research, not a person remembering. I hung up and sat there breathing like I'd run a mile. Then the phone rang again. Same number. I didn't answer. I locked the doors. I checked the windows. I turned on every light like brightness could keep ghosts out. My brain started building wild explanations. Prank call, identity theft, grief-driven breakdown, actual paranormal event. By morning, I did the most responsible thing I've ever done in my life. I called the lottery office and asked about privacy measures. Then I called the lawyer. Then, because my hands still wouldn't stop shaking, I called a therapist and booked an appointment. It wasn't my parents. It was someone who thought their best move was to wear my grief like a costume. Winning the lottery didn't just change my bank account. It proved how fast the world will test your sanity when it smells money. Next story. When I won, everyone expected fireworks. They expected me to scream, to jump around, to post a screenshot with a caption like, "We did it!" They expected champagne and a new car and a sudden glow that only rich people seem to have. What I actually did was sit on the kitchen floor and cry until my face felt swollen. Because the first thought that hit me wasn't about houses or vacations or quitting my job. It was this. I can't call my parents. They died too young enough that people still talk about it with that soft, careful voice, like the sadness might break if you touch it too hard. My mom went first, then my dad a couple years later. The kind of double loss that doesn't feel real until you reach for the phone out of habit and remember there's nobody there to pick up. So when my relatives started messaging, asking what I was going to do for the family, I felt something twist inside me. Not anger exactly, more like exhaustion. Like the money had already started pulling people toward it like gravity. Someone made a joke. Your parents would ask for half. I stared at the screen for a long time, then typed nothing because I didn't have the energy to explain that my parents wouldn't ask for anything. They never would have. They would have demanded I take care of myself first. They would have argued with me if I tried to give them too much. My dad used to get genuinely irritated when I offered to pay for his beer at the bar, like accepting help from his kid was an insult to his role in the universe. If I could trade the entire winning ticket just to have one more dinner with them, I would. One more ordinary, boring night where my mom complains about how cold the restaurant is and my dad talks to strangers like they've been friends for years. One more chance to see them become grandparents, because they would have been incredible at it. Instead, I sat at my table with a pen and wrote down the things they cared about. Not flashy things, practical things. Safety, education, quiet joy. I set up a college fund for my niece and nephew. I paid for a scholarship at my old high school in my mom's name. I donated to the hospital that took care of my dad. I bought myself a house that felt like a home, not a trophy. And then I went to the cemetery with flowers and told them the truth out loud. I finally made it. The money didn't fill the hole they left, nothing could, but it gave me the ability to build a life they would have been proud of. And sometimes, on the days when grief hits hardest, that's the closest thing to comfort I can find. Next story. My mom doesn't remember what day it is anymore, but she still remembers my face. That's the strange part about dementia. It steals the calendar first, then the names, then the simple words that used to come so easily. Some mornings she asks me if I'm her brother. Other days she tells me I look tired and offers me tea, like I'm still the kid who came home from school angry at the world. When I won the lottery, my first reaction was to protect her. Not from hunger or bills, but from people. Because money has a way of drawing strangers out of the dark. And my mom, sweet as she is, would hand over everything she owned if someone spoke to her kindly for 5 minutes. My dad is gone. It's been long enough that the grief doesn't knock me over anymore, but it still sits there like a stone in my pocket. So when people asked, "What would your parents say?" I had to swallow the answer. My mom would probably smile, clap her hands, and then ask me where the bathroom is. My dad would have said to keep it quiet. He would have been right. I didn't tell anyone the amount. Not family, not friends, not even the neighbor who always asked too many questions. I met with an attorney and a care planner first. Then I did the only thing that made sense. I built my mother a life that felt like peace. I hired a full-time caregiver, someone trained, patient, and firm enough to say no when Mom tried to wander outside in slippers at midnight. I moved her into a small, comfortable home near a park so she could sit outside safely. I paid for memory care support, regular doctor visits, and the kind of food she actually likes, not just whatever was cheapest. And I did something that sounds silly, but mattered. I made sure she had little luxuries. Fresh flowers on the table, soft blankets, her favorite music playing low in the afternoons, a pair of shoes that didn't hurt her feet. The sort of things she would never spend money on for herself, even back when her mind was sharp. One day she looked at me with sudden clarity and said, "You're doing too much, honey." I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to say, "I can finally take care of you the way you took care of me." But her clarity is fragile, like mist. So I just kissed her forehead and said, "You deserve a good life." She smiled, satisfied, and 5 minutes later asked me again what day it was. The money didn't fix the illness, it didn't bring back time, but it gave me something priceless, the power to make sure her remaining days are gentle, safe, and full of dignity. Next story. I didn't learn how dangerous sudden money can be from the news. I learned it from my adoptive dad. When I was a teenager, he won a huge lawsuit. Not nice vacation money, retirement money. The kind that makes people talk differently, like the future is solved and nothing can touch you now. He built a beautiful house on acreage. There were plans. There was a sense that we were finally secure, that the hard part of life was over. Then the spending started. It wasn't all at once. It was death by 1,000 treat-yourself decisions. A fancy truck, a bigger TV, tools he didn't use, friends who suddenly needed help, a cousin with a business idea, little withdrawals that felt harmless because the account still looked big. Every time anyone questioned it, he'd get defensive and say, "It's my money. I earned it." Years passed. The money thinned. Then it disappeared. By the time I was grown, he was broke and still working, still stressed, still acting like the loss was some unfair accident instead of the predictable end of a pattern. So when I won the lottery, I didn't feel excitement the way you'd expect. I felt warning lights flashing in my brain. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't even tell my closest friends. I told one person, my oldest brother. He's the one who reads contracts before signing them. The one who builds businesses instead of buying toys. The one who can look at a number and think 10 years ahead. We met in a quiet coffee shop like we were planning a heist, not a life. I slid the ticket across the table and watched his eyebrows lift, just slightly. No shouting, no wild ideas, just, "Okay, first step, legal protection." Within a week, we had lawyers involved, accountants, paperwork that made the money boring again. We created structures that didn't rely on willpower, automatic transfers, investment accounts, limits. I paid my own debts, set up savings, and made plans that wouldn't collapse if I had one bad year emotionally. The hardest part was my dad asking questions. He noticed I wasn't stressed anymore. He noticed I was paying bills early. He joked about me finding a money tree. And every time he did, I remembered the man who once had everything and let it leak away because he couldn't say no to the thrill of spending. So I smiled and kept it simple. Work's been good. I still help people, quietly, anonymously. A mortgage paid off here, a medical bill covered there. I just don't hand anyone, especially my father, a bucket and call it security. The lottery didn't change me into someone secretive. It just reminded me that money doesn't disappear in one dramatic moment. It disappears in a series of small mistakes that feel like kindness until it's too late. Next story. My parents moved closer to me a few months before I won. They didn't do it for money. They did it for my kids. For birthdays and school plays, and the kind of Sunday dinners that make you feel like life is stitched together properly. They downsized, packed up decades of memories, and drove across the country because they wanted to be present. So when the lottery ticket turned into a number that made my hand shake, I already knew one thing. They weren't going to ask for half. They were going to ask if I was okay. That didn't stop the rest of the family from circling. The first call I got was from an aunt who hadn't checked on me in years. She was suddenly so proud and so excited and so worried about my stress. Then she started hinting about her credit card interest. My cousin's call came next. Then a distant relative who somehow had my number and acted like we were close friends. Meanwhile, my parents were still being my parents. My mom was worrying about my workload. My dad was making jokes about me finally being able to replace my broken lawnmower. They didn't feel entitled. They felt protective. So I made a decision. I would take care of them fully, and I would handle everyone else case by case, quietly, carefully, and with limits. I paid off my parents' house first. No debate, no conditions. I watched my dad's shoulders drop like he'd been carrying that weight without admitting it. My mom cried, then tried to refuse, then cried harder when I told her it was already done. For the kids, I set up college funds and made the paperwork boring enough that nobody could touch it. I didn't tell anyone the balances. I didn't even tell the kids. I just wanted them to have options later, not pressure now. The in-laws were the hard part. Some were fine, some were kind, but one sister-in-law was a mess. Reckless, impulsive, and the kind of person who thinks yelling counts as parenting. I'd seen how she treated her kid when nobody was watching, and I hated it. I couldn't hand her cash knowing it would vanish into chaos. So, I didn't. I offered support the way a responsible adult does. Groceries delivered, medical bills handled directly, help that couldn't be converted into a new toy or a new problem. When she demanded money instead, she called me selfish. That word used to hurt. Now it just sounded like noise. Winning didn't make me generous. I already was. Winning just forced me to choose where generosity ends and enabling begins. And if there's one thing my parents taught me, without ever asking for half, it's that love doesn't mean handing someone the steering wheel of your life.